Hello, this is Adam from the podcast series Here is the Horror. Before today's episode, I have a short announcement about the series going forward. Due to limited time for production, my co-host Daniel and I have agreed that all future episodes will need to be a bit shorter in length. Some listeners have also said that they would prefer a shorter length, so hopefully this benefits everyone. Our recording of an episode covering the Silent Hill series ran especially long, so we'll be cutting the episode into 3 mini-sodes about the series, released across this week. Our regular show will resume as usual the following week, but for now, thanks for listening, enjoy the mini-sode, and stay horrified.
Today, on Here is the Horror.
Don't stand there looking so smug. You're the worst person in this room. You come here and enjoy spilling their blood. And listening to them cry out. You feel excited when you step on them and snuff out their lives.
Are you talking about the monsters?
Monsters? They look like monsters to you?
Oh no.
Don't worry. It's just a joke.
Now we can move on to Silent Hill 3. I recall this one seeming like it had a very different tone at the time it came out. It felt a lot more mainstream, a lot more... had a much bigger promotional campaign behind it. The musical style in this one took a shift into have a lot more focus on the trip hop and rock elements. There's a ton of vocal songs for this game, with vocals from Mary Elizabeth McGlynn and Joe Ramersa, and just a bunch of extra costumes for Heather. It just seemed like this was where Silent Hill really blew up.
Yeah, this was the Silent Hill game that was designed for someone Heather's age to play. That culture in specific. I mean, I know there's always been teenagers who played video games, but this one was marketed to a much broader audience, and they have a lot of fun with this game. It reminds me a lot, like a contrast to Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. It's the same thing, but tonally they have a lot more fun with what they're presenting.
I remember seeing in one interview, I think Masahiro Ito said that Silent Hill 2 didn't have a very good reception in Japan initially, so maybe that's part of the reason for the change in tone. Although I know also something interesting with this one is the team actually kind of got split, Team Silent, who had made 1 and 2. And I've seen some stuff say that 3 and 4 were made concurrently, but I also saw an interview with Akira Yamaoka where he said they were about 2/3 through making Part 3 before they started on 4.
I could definitely see that.
3, they started on it almost immediately right after 2, and it had a smaller team than 2.
There were a few more notable changes in Silent Hill 3 as well. Not so much as a more action-oriented game, but it kind of aped and built upon the dodge system in RE3. You're able to dodge and block. You have access to lure items in this game that you can throw down, and it will pull monsters off your trail.
Beef jerky like Zelda 1. You also have some more out there weapons. I think the others, outside of the pyramid head sword, it was pretty much just pistol, shotgun, and rifle, whereas in this game you get submachine guns, katanas, a maul.
Well, there was a plethora of unlockable costumes and weapons. You had the mundane to the completely absurd, like the transform outfit, the sexy beam, the beam saber. My personal favorite, the gold and silver pipes. There's an abundance of Easter eggs in this game too, and the series starts to become very self-referential.
And in what ways?
You have a lot of, depending on whether you had a Silent Hill 2 save file on your memory card or not, it would increase the amount, but there's a lot of references to Silent Hill 2 in this game, which lends credence to the fact that Silent Hill, once again, is different to each person who enters, and that there are different portions of Silent Hill.
And speaking of, I suppose another big difference is that this is the first game that isn't in Silent Hill, at least not for the first half of the game.
Very true. It kind of shows that its influence can spread beyond Silent Hill. To add to that, there was something I forgot to mention in Silent Hill 2. You can actually find a news article that mentions Walter Sullivan, which would play a big part in Silent Hill 4.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of things like that. I mean, 4 really calls back a whole lot of things from earlier in the series. Like, even in 3, you find an article about an orphanage that turns out in 4 to be where Walter Sullivan was raised.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. This game is where it really starts to ramp up on referencing the other games, indirectly and in some cases directly referencing previous titles. Well, this game in itself directly follows Silent Hill 1. In this game, too, you're also encouraged to do less running and hiding and more combat, especially if you're going for one of the potential endings. It didn't go full-blown the route of RE4 or RE5.
Not yet.
Yeah, where there isn't a reason to ever avoid combat, but I think you're definitely expected to do more combat in this game, which is evident in some of the weapons you can unlock, some of the abilities you can unlock, like double bullets, and the fact that you get a lot more weapons in this game.
Yeah, and I feel like we're making it sound very commercial, and this game did seem a lot more commercial than the other two when it came out, but keep in mind, all the things that we're describing are very subtle, and they mostly seem so prominent just because the system in Silent Hill was so light at this point in time. Realistically, if some person that's never played them before plays 15 minutes of 2 and then 15 minutes of 3, they're probably not going to think that there's much of a difference between them gameplay-wise at all.
Very true. So, this particular entry will open up with Heather falling asleep at a mall.
At the Happy Burger.
Yes. And she has a creepy-ass dream where she is at an amusement park. And this dream can end one of two ways.
And I guess I should say this amusement park is a location from the first game.
Yep. If you're playing on any difficulty besides easy, because if you have the game's difficulty set to easy, Heather cannot fall in holes. But if you're playing on anything other than easy, you can end this dream by falling in a hole. Or you make it to the end of this area where there is a roller coaster and you have a final destination moment. Basically, Heather goes splat. This whole portion also plays almost like a tutorial to try to educate you to the controls of the game and how to play it.
Yeah, but it also mirrors the first game, how it opened with a dream, and aside from this game just being a direct sequel to the first game, you will see it mirroring a whole lot of things from the first game. It's not in like a shameless copy or back to the drawing board thing after 2. It's more going to be in theme with 3, because 3 does have a whole lot going on underneath the hood, and most of the themes of Silent Hill 3 are all about the concept of cycles and rebirth and repeating.
And there will be a lot of parallels, like you said, between Silent Hill 1 and Silent Hill 3. There's actually a lot of events where Heather experiences almost the exact same event that Harry did. But however you choose to get awoken from this nightmare, a private detective named Douglas shows up. He mentions this mysterious order.
I think all he says at this point is that he needs to talk to her about her past, at which she flees to the women's restroom where he can't follow.
Mm-hmm.
And in that restroom you actually get your first save point, which is on a mirror, which is... We didn't really talk about it because I don't think it's too relevant, but in Silent Hill 1, the save points were just notepads, and in Silent Hill 2, they were red pieces of paper. But in Silent Hill 3, the save points are a lot more relevant, and the save points are this red sigil made of a series of circles with a bunch of runes and symbols on it called the Halo of the Sun. And this symbol was in Silent Hill 1, and it's basically the symbol of the Order, but it's used as your save point in this game, and this game will sort of flesh out that symbol is all about their cycles, with the 3 inner circles representing the past, present, and the future, and that's why they're your save point. And even later in the game, when you die, there's always a chance that you'll have an image of being drugged back to the last sigil, as if it won't let you die because it needs you to continue the rebirth.
And I should mention here that depending on what unlockables you use, Heather's justification for wanting to escape from Douglas is a lot more relevant, because it is possible to play through the entire game with Douglas wearing boxers only. The first time I played through the game, I actually did this.
I thought you could only do that on New Game Plus. You'd know better than me. I don't know.
There's a code you can input that allows you to just unlock it. You can unlock it, but like many of the outfits, you can either unlock them or you can just put in the code on the typewriter that unlocks them. Plus, I may or may not have had a Game Shark. But it adds a little bit more credence to her wanting to flee from this strange man, this strange old man in boxers saying, "Hey, I need to talk to you." After Heather escapes, she realizes that there are now monsters in the mall.
Although it's less clear this time if they're them and we're them and they're us.
Very true. After battling your way for a little while, Claudia shows up seeking Alessa. This, right now, is all garbage to Heather. She doesn't understand. She knows probably that someone dressed like the extra from a movie about the Amish shouldn't be wandering around in a mall looking for a little girl.
That's no way to speak about a woman with bare feet and no eyebrows.
She does hint to Heather that she has a greater purpose, which causes Heather to have a migraine, and Claudia beats feet. Heather decides she wants to try to leave the mall at this point, and then she is thrust into the Otherworld Mall. There's a couple of new monsters new to the series she encounters here. There's a lot of different things you can play around with at this point. There's a couple of nice little Easter eggs you can find.
Since you brought up the monsters, I guess I'd like to say, I feel like Silent Hill 1's monsters were just kind of all over the place, both in design and in gameplay focus. And 2, I feel like gameplay-wise they were still kind of indistinguishable, but they had a cohesive design. I feel like in Silent Hill 3 is where you start to get more of a gameplay focus on the monsters, where you have ones like the closer that are super huge for like blocking areas, then the dogs come back to be, rapid fire enemy. Well, a different dog enemy shows up to be your quick enemy. I feel like there's a lot more focus on different enemies requiring different techniques and strategies in this game.
And as always, I hate dog enemies in any survival horror game. They exist only to make you waste ammo via their erratic movement.
Or to slow you down just long enough for one of the big guys to hit you.
Yes. They're not quite as annoying as they are in the Resident Evil series, mainly because trying to use the combat knife to kill a dog in the Resident Evil games is almost entirely futile, but you do get a certain pleasure from beating a mutant monster dog to death with a pipe, which isn't incredibly hard to do in this game. As Heather makes her way out of the mall, you have your first boss fight of the game, and it's a decent design. I enjoy the worm boss.
Well, it kind of seems like a throwback to the worm boss that's the first boss you fight in 1.
Yeah.
Well, the one in part 1 has legs, I think, but has the same face with like the splitting apart face.
After this boss fight, Douglas shows back up, and at this point, he basically seems like he's trying to lure her into a candy van.
Well, at least he confirms that he sees the monsters too.
Yeah.
So you're a little less, at least I feel like they probably inserted that here just to let the players know that this is going to be not quite like Silent Hill 2, where everyone's just having their own personal crazy vision.
Yeah, I think it's because Douglas's only attachment right now, since we're not actually in Silent Hill, his only attachment, his only exposure to Silent Hill is vicariously through Heather, so he's going to see what she sees. Now, there is a really cool optional scene you can have in the subway after Douglas leaves. It's one of my favorite things in this game. You can go around and find an article about a person that was killed by the subway train. If you do this, when you return to the subway, the ghost will actually show up and push you off onto the tracks, and you have a split second to get off of the track before you also get splatted by a train. Now, I didn't know this was optional initially, because every time I played the game, I have a habit of searching every nook and cranny and corner, just mashing on the interaction button to make sure that I've found everything that is possible to be found in a room. So I initially didn't know this was optional, but it's a really cool scene, and I think it's something that'll be played up in the next game a lot, because at this point you haven't really seen a lot of supernatural in the sense of ghosts or anything, but at this point it's very clearly the ghost of the man that died in the subway, and he's like, well, it happened to me, so I'm going to do it to everyone else. So after this, Heather beats it from the subway. She escapes through a construction area where she meets up for the first time with Vincent.
My man.
You were always a big Vincent fan, and Vincent, it's always nice when Vincent shows up in this game. He has a very nice duality that comes out. It's not as extreme as Maria's, where one minute he's like, ha ha ha, and the next minute he's like, don't laugh at me. It's very hard to pin down the end game for him initially.
While Silent Hill 1 had the cult, it wasn't really relevant. It was very background and not much info on it. Silent Hill 3 goes all in on the cult, and then there's a much bigger focus on occult horror in 3. You'll be constantly finding tons of religious documents fleshing out their mythology, naming their deities, explaining how it all works, and then even beyond that there's a whole bunch of interfaction disputes within the order. For instance, you have obviously Claudia trying to do her branch of the order, but then you have Vincent who's resisting what she wants to do with the order and bringing up things like his financial backing to the order, and then later on you'll have Leonard who has his own ideas. You're just sort of caught in the middle of this giant civil war between the members of this order.
Heather parts from Vincent and makes it back to the apartment she shares with her father, Harry. Dun dun dun! Harry is dead, murdered in his chair.
Yeah, I think they tried to actually hide in the early stuff for this game that Heather was Harry's daughter, the one that was retrieved from Silent Hill, but I think it got leaked to everyone before the game finally came out.
This leads to your next confrontation with Claudia when Heather makes it to the roof of the apartment building and finds Claudia waiting. She explains that murdering Harry was part of a plan to incite hate in Heather/Alessa's heart. Claudia mentions that she will be waiting in Silent Hill and leaves with the missionary to stay behind and kill Heather. The whole point is to get Heather to Silent Hill. Why not just have the missionary grab her and drag her back? Maybe that was her plan. I'm just going to leave the missionary here to drag you back to Silent Hill whether you want to go or not. And the minute Claudia leaves, the missionary's like, I ain't having that. I'm just going to kill her. Maybe he was on Vincent's side the whole time. You kill the missionary, and I'll speak more on this later, but there is an alternate way to defeat the missionary. She returns to find Douglas again. God, this guy can't take a hint. No means no. Together, they get Harry's body. They lay it in a bed rather than calling the police.
I don't know, I do enjoy the scene in the house where her father's just died and Douglas wanders in and is just trying to have casual conversation and she's just screaming, "Get out!" He's fine, if that'll make you feel better. And she's just, you can tell she's just struggling to not go off on him again.
Well, she doesn't call the police. She doesn't call an ambulance. She instead just drags her dad's body. She tampers with a crime scene, tampers with a corpse, drags him upstairs, and throws a blanket over him and some flowers, I guess to cover up the smell of a rotting corpse from her neighbors. It'll give her a head start before the FBI starts looking for her. At this point, she has 100% decided that she is going to Silent Hill to get revenge.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And in part 1, Harry's trapped in Silent Hill, but wants to be there anyways until he finds his daughter. And in 2, James comes to Silent Hill and is determined to be there to find Mary. In 3, Heather, Silent Hill pretty much comes to her and she's just trying to get home up until this point. This point where she decides she wants revenge against Claudia, she's still not in Silent Hill. It kind of seems like maybe she might want to get the police involved, but
yeah, I mean, call 911 and be like, yeah, this lady and her ballerina monster killed my father. You'll note that there's no blood on me. The murder weapon isn't here. She did say she was going to a town named Silent Hill, so that makes this an interstate murder. You can go ahead and get the FBI involved if you want, but I guess they didn't want the game to turn into The Shadow over Innsmouth.
Or maybe she didn't want to have to answer questions about why she has all these firearms and has been firing bullets from them all across the subway.
And the mall. Hey, we're looking for someone who fits your description. They just trashed the mall, stole a bunch of stuff, and then left.
Well, later on in the game, it'll turn out to probably be pretty good that she didn't get the police involved.
Yeah. So, after this impromptu funeral, she meets back up with Douglas. He gives her a gift from Vincent. He lets her know that Vincent said to look for Leonard Wolf, which is Claudia's father, and he gives her Harry's handy-dandy exposition notebook.
That's where he keeps his save games.
It's also where he keeps the entire plot of Silent Hill 1.
Well, you also get, we kind of skipped over, it has that really good car ride scene where Douglas drives Heather to Silent Hill, and over the whole ride it's playing that Letter from Lost Day song by Akira Yamaoka with vocals from Mary Elizabeth McGlynn. I don't know, I really like that scene where Heather's just staring out the window, telling Douglas about this cult that tried to birth a god, but it worked, and I think that scene is actually really well done.
I think it's incredible that Douglas, now in his favor, he's a hard-boiled noir detective from the 1940s. He has very little trouble psychologically accepting everything that's going on. I guess he saw a monster and he's like, okay, yeah, an alternate dimension exists inside of a town and we're going there.
I mean, he's up there in the years. He's willing to go out on an adventure. I assume that he really just knows that it's his fault that Harry died because the cult hired him to find Heather. He just didn't realize that they were a cult at the time.
And he does explain that to her. You know, the cult hired me to find you. I didn't know that they were batshit crazy trying to summon an eldritch god, basically. You know, as a private eye, you think he would look more into where the funding comes from, but, you know, maybe he was just hard up. Maybe he's just lonely, and he will do anything to have a friend follow him around.
Except wear pants.
Yes. So Heather makes it to the hospital. She finds her stalker, Stanley. Her stalker that is apparently clairvoyant and knows where she's going to be before she gets there.
The reused hospital from part 2.
Yes. She then is transported to the Otherworld Hospital.
On this note, I kind of wanted to say, I know we talked about how in part 1 the Otherworld was all rust and barbed wire, and in part 2 it was like the damp mildew land. The Otherworld in 3 is much closer to 1s than 2s, but it is still somewhat different. I feel like there's a lot more of less rust and more just like blood and splotchiness on the wall, and they use some interesting technology to have these like textures of blood splotches and veins arcing across the walls.
Yes, it's a lot of tendrils and stuff like that, too.
Yeah. I know, and I did see an interview where they said that they wanted the walls to look alive, and I think that's just in line with the whole theming around 3 with the rebirth. Obviously, the whole point of this is the cult's trying to make Heather birth their god for them. So you have this big focus on the color red in the game, even at the beginning, when you sneak out of the women's bathroom, the skybox is red, the logo for this game is red, and you get a lot of these transitional scenes in the game where it's whereas you have like a blotchy blood filter that transitions the screen. You
have a couple of really good sequences in the Otherworld Hospital too. You have the tendril room. The first time I went in there, I died because I didn't know what to do. If you've not ever experienced it, Heather goes into this room and there is a big mirror across from her, and as she looks into the mirror, these tendrils start growing around the reflection of the room, and then they also, after a time, start to spread throughout the room Heather is actually physically inhabiting, and then her reflection begins to change. And if you wait around in here too long, you will die.
And I believe that's all just supposed to represent, the sort of a lesser side of Heather that's still within her. Because the game does seem to have a bit of a special attention given to mirrors also. Like, your first save point is the halo of the sun on a mirror, and when you're in like Heather's apartment, there's no mirror in the bathroom, and the mirror in her room is covered up.
Yeah, Heather definitely has a fear of mirrors. I think that probably has a lot to do subconsciously. She may not be aware of it at all, but with the part of Alessa that is inside of her.
Yeah, because I guess we didn't really say too much in the ending of the first game, but Heather is sort of Alessa and Cheryl recombined. So every time you're looking at these save points, the red symbol of the order, every time you save them, she comments some about how she feels like it's messing around in her head, or that her head hurts and it feels like she's remembering things. And the further you go through the game, she says different things on each save point, and eventually it becomes clear that she's just remembering more and more of Alessa's memories as the game goes on.
Which makes you wonder if Harry ever laments Cheryl Beta. I mean, the baby he takes home is Cheryl and Alessa mixed together, but it's like if you have a child and they die and you have them cloned, do you just never lament the original child because you have an identical copy of them growing? Maybe Harry's not a great a father as the series tries to portray him as. Oh, I've got a new Cheryl, so let's forget the old one. You get the really, really creepy ass happy birthday phone call. And this is kind of played around with in PT. Not the happy birthday aspect, but the phone does play a pretty big part in PT. And I like to think that's kind of a callback to this nerve-wracking happy birthday phone call. As you travel through the hotel, you will finally meet Claudia's father, Leonard.
Great guy.
Yeah. It's a shame that you have to kill him and then steal his jewelry.
His useless jewelry, I'll add.
Well, you don't know that at the time. You have no reason to think it's going to be useful either, so why she takes his pimp chain is beyond me. It is, of course, the seal of Metatron, which will thematically come into play later when we start to learn about Valtiel. After this, she heads to Jack's Inn to meet Douglas, which is where he said he was heading earlier, and instead she finds Vincent waiting again. He tells her where Claudia is and that you have to go through a creepy abandoned amusement park at night. So basically she has to go to every amusement park from every horror movie ever, where she plays through her dream scenario from the beginning of the game again, only this time she knows that there is a haunted roller coaster gunning for her, and she dodges it. We will also see the giant, creepy, stuffed Robbie the Rabbit, too. The first time I played through this game, I knew at some point I was going to have to go back there, and it was going to be missing, and I was going to play Hide from the Killer. Luckily, there is no mascot chasing you down to kill you.
It's one of those moments where I think them not doing anything with it is better than them if they'd actually done something with it. Because it means you never get to go past the phase of anticipating it. You're just trapped there.
Exactly. The whole time I'm in the amusement park, I'm waiting for Robbie the Rabbit to come chasing out. I'm waiting for the crescendo of music and Robbie the Rabbit to come running down the gangway at me. Luckily, it doesn't happen because that would be super creepy. So she makes it through the amusement park, and then she comes upon an argument between Douglas and Claudia. He basically points out the infinite crisis paradox to Claudia when she's describing what her god wants. If you don't know, infinite crisis was an event that happened in the DC universe pre-New 52, and Superboy decides that none of the worlds are worthy of having a real Superman because of how much they let the worlds get corrupted. So he starts fighting everybody basically, and in one particular fight he is told that the Superman paradox, a perfect world doesn't need a Superman. Douglas decides he's had enough of Claudia's weird ass and plays high noon with her. We don't really see what happens here. It cuts out, but we find out shortly thereafter that it did not work out in Douglas's favor, because when Heather finds him, he is sitting on a bench with a broken leg, courtesy of Claudia.
I assume she just had another missionary come smash his leg with a golf club or something, because it's kind of alluded to that Claudia might have some kind of power, but it always seemed to me that was more clairvoyant than anything telekinetic or anything like that.
True. After this, Heather goes to the carousel and has a boss fight with Dark Link.
I think that scene's actually pretty good. Much better than their attempt to do it in Silent Hill Revelation.
Oh, I completely agree.
because you're Heather Cheryl versus like the original version of Alessa, and it actually gets stated that she's trying to stop you because you continuing to go on nurturing this hatred for Claudia is exactly what Claudia wants.
Yes, and she does not want them to succeed. Whether it's by her own morality or, out of pure pettiness, she doesn't want them to get what they want.
And of course, in the middle of the carousel, you have a flaming body there, which is, of course, what happened to Alessa the last time they tried to do the ritual. And the whole carousel's spinning the entire time you're fighting on it, which just seems to continue with that theme of cycles and rebirths.
Ugh. Well, and it's completely unnerving, too.
And in fact, even like when you first start up the game, the very first thing you see to start off that dream sequence is an aerial view of the carousel spinning and the circles on it mirroring those on the halo of the sun.
Speaking of Silent Hill Revelations, as you stated, it works a lot better than the attempt in that film, since it doesn't go from Alessa versus Alessa to Pyramid Head, who is now controlled by Alessa, fighting the first boss you fight in this game. After she vanquishes Dark Link, Heather moves to the chapel and eventually comes upon an argument between Claudia and Vincent in the library. After a bit of back and forth, he posits to her the question, "They look like monsters to you?" He infers he's just joking, but personally I think it plays more to the fact that Silent Hill bends to the perception of the individual, and that the cultist Silent Hill makes them appear as monsters to Heather. This would, of course, have to expand out into things like the mall, where the monsters she were fighting were cultists that had showed up to ensure Douglas did his job. But that all goes back to, if their entire purpose is to get Heather to Silent Hill and birth baby Antichrist, then why is everything trying to kill her instead of just drag her off? Shortly after this point, Claudia shows back up and kills Mr. Move the Plot Along while mocking the power of the seal. Heather gives chase, and she imbibes the Kool-Aid of fetus returning.
This whole point in the game, you had a necklace that your dad Harry gave you, and if you ever bothered going in your inventory to examine it, you'd see it has a red stone in it, which is made of the aglyphotis that was also used to exorcise the possessions in the first game.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about when I said the Kool-Aid of fetus returning.
I feel like the viewers that haven't played Silent Hill 3 might have needed more clarification.
She vomits up Baby God and wants to squish him like a roach, but Claudia won't waste such a tasty treat and scarfs it down before pulling a Wile E. Coyote in one of the notorious holes plaguing Silent Hill. Heather, like a woman possessed, decides to jump down the hole after her, and God is dead. After finishing this, we're presented with 3 endings to Silent Hill 3. The normal ending, which is the one considered canon due to Silent Hill Homecoming. Heather plays the worst practical joke ever on Douglas. She comes walking up to him with a weird look in her eye and a off gait, brandishing a knife, and then starts laughing like a psychopath. And it's all a joke. She decides she wants to go back to being Cheryl rather than Heather, but she is going to stay blonde because having your father murdered, being hunted by a death cult, constantly being thrust between two worlds, and being a reincarnated Antichrist birther is more fun because blondes have more fun. And that's a direct quote. You have the Possess ending, in which Heather murders Douglas. You must be on at least a second playthrough, kill as many enemies as possible, take a lot of damage, and you likely have to forgive the Confessor to get the points required for this ending. Then you have the obligatory joke ending in Revenge. You are abducted and find Harry and James, who basically emulate Sam and Dean from Supernatural here. It's a very playful back and forth, because after hearing of the plight you suffered through, Harry sends aliens to destroy Silent Hill. There's some voiceover between the three before they all appear to be gunned down off screen. Notable for me in Silent Hill 3 is the track Lost Carol. It is one of my favorite pieces of video game music I've ever heard. It ranks right up there with Terra's theme, Frog's theme, Shadow's theme, pretty much anything from Earthbound. It's for me, a treasured piece of video game music. We also, for the first time in this game, get to physically see Valtiel's creepy ass.
You actually haven't even mentioned Valtiel at any point in this.
I know, because it just goes along in the, like you were talking about, where you find out all the stuff about the cults and the beliefs, because you never actually physically confront him in the game.
No, you just see him in the background constantly all throughout the game, usually turning a valve, which just continues to go with that theme of cycles.
Yeah. Valtiel is the quote-unquote valve turner of Silent Hill. It's posited that his turning of the valve is possibly what transforms the normal world into the other world. You get some really cool scenes where you see him skittering around in the rafters. You get to see him drag off a nurse at one point. Being so important to the lore of the games, this is really the most exposure you ever really get to see him. And one more notable thing about this game is that it serves as the inspiration for Silent Hill Revelations. And while it is not the greatest film, or even the greatest Silent Hill film for that matter, it is notable for being one of the only films that Sean Bean actually survives. So that's something.
Yeah, I do think it's very good that after Pyramid Head and the popularity of him, there would have been a strong urge to do that again, and that's what we'll see some later games do, is just try to have Pyramid Head 2.0, but I think it's good that Team Silent always seemed like they wanted to keep things fresh and original, and so instead you get Valtiel, who's fulfilling a similar role, but in a very different way. The most direct engagement you have with him is when you get a game over, and occasionally you'll show him dragging your corpse to start the cycle over again, which, yeah, in some interviews, staff said that they thought of that as just part of that same cycle of rebirth as your saving and loading game, as Heather dying and being born again, just like she did when Alyssa became Cheryl, and then Cheryl became Heather, and then Heather births God. I'm kind of amused how much you skimmed over the god itself. I really like its design, where its face looks very Alessa-esque, but its upper torso is really all it really has going, and then everything, like from spine down, is just bone. It really highlights just how unfinished it is.
What you said about getting drug off screen after a game over, that kind of potentially pokes holes in the fun I was having at the game's expense about how everyone wants Heather to come to Silent Hill and birth the demon baby, but everything's just trying to kill her. Maybe they don't kill her when you get a game over. You get knocked out and they drag you off so they can strap you down to a table to birth the god. But then again, if that's the point, why didn't they just do that immediately after killing your father? Instead of just having a boss waiting up there to drag you back, they should have had like 20 dogs and 12 nurses. It's a really good game. I enjoyed it. It's actually probably the game I played the most from the series. The only thing that could give it a close run is Silent Hill 2. I've fully played through it 3 times, maybe 4. Silent Hill 3, when I played that game, I got super into it, and I think I fully played through the game 6 times. I think I attempted to get everything unlocked, and I never actually finished that, but I gave it the old college try.
Yeah, that was 1 and 4 for me. Well, at this point, it would be time to move on to 4. However, I think this is running a lot longer than I'd anticipated, so I think we may have to break this up and split it into some additional episodes. I'd really hoped we'd at least get to 4, because that's my personal favorite, and also I feel like it's mellowing out now, but for a long time there was a tendency in the fandom to count the original trilogy on its own and 4 separate, but I think 4 belongs with the rest of the ones that Team Silent made, since Team Silent did make it.
And Silent Hill 4 for me really is the one that you experience the most like you would a horror movie.
I agree with that.
I really love the whole spy on your neighbor aspect of your apartment too.
The rear window vibe.
Yes. But we will definitely get to that sometime soon. Can't promise when, but we will pick up where we have left off eventually. With Silent Hill 4, The Room. And that's not the potentially more terrifying Tommy Wiseau film.
That's the true horror.
You're tearing me apart, James.
Alright, well, I guess we'll just have to continue residing in the other world for now. Hopefully we'll get out and back to the fog someday.
I did not give birth to a death god. It's bullshit. I did not.
I think it should be more BP James. I did not smother her. I did not.
It's bullshit.
Oh, hi, Pyramid Head. This concludes today's mini-sode of Here's the Horror's 3-part series covering Silent Hill 1 through 3. Remember to subscribe and review Here's the Horror for free on the podcast service of your choice and on YouTube. You can also visit our website at here'sthehorror.com and follow Here's the Horror on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Have anything to say about horror films, games, or novels? Have any topics you'd like us to discuss? Questions, comments, and suggestions can be sent via email to hereisthehorror@gmail.com. Please consider subscribing to Here's the Horror on Patreon. Every little bit helps to support the podcast, and patrons gain access to bonus episodes and more. The opening song is Nightmare Machine by Kevin MacLeod. The interstitial songs are Supernatural Radio by Kevin MacLeod, The Visitor by Shane Ivers, and Engulfed by the Night by Darren Curtis. The closing song is Dealing with the Devil by Darren Curtis. Thank you for listening to today's mini-episode, and remember, stay horrified.
With vocals from Mary Elizabeth. Blah, blah, blah.
Are we on radio silence?
Wi-Fi is reconnecting. Oh, there it is.
Nothing? Nothing? Tra-la-la? Quit saying It's the Sillamatron of Metatron. It's the Sill of Materon. She decides she wants to go back to being Cheryl rather than Why'd I sound Irish for 5 seconds? Heather murders Douglas.